Peter Blum. I'm the VP of Product Management at Instart Logic, and I'm joined here by Kieran, who's one of our great customers. And so today we're going to talk about sort of using a different kind of architecture for delivering websites and web applications that's particularly useful on mobile networks. So Instart Logic has been around for a little over 4 years now. We're a Silicon Valley startup. We're a SaaS company focused on application delivery, and we tend to work with people who really care deeply about customer experience. And so one of the things you'll see from Moda Operandi is they love customer experience, and they have a beautiful sort of web user experience that they've created. And we tend to work with people who care a lot about performance and security. We've got a great team. So actually the initial kind of team that put the company together had nothing to do with web delivery or web performance. It's probably one of the reasons we kind of came up with this very different architecture for the service. A lot of the folks came from big data. I myself came from Citrix with a virtualization background. And then over time, I think we've added sort of people from the traditional web delivery and performance space. And in terms of the customers, we've got over 400 sites on the service today. We tend to have a lot of focus around e-commerce, because of the performance. We also have a lot of news and media customers, as well as SaaS customers, and also gaming customers. But some of the notable ones, we run the mobile site for Staples. The Washington Post, we run their desktop and mobile site. And we've got a ton of different e-commerce customers here, one of which we're happy is here today to present with us. So, I've been in the web space for quite some time. I actually was a web developer 10, 15 years ago. And at that point, the world was a lot simpler. Most of the users were on the same kind of system. They were on some sort of Wintel box. I really only worried about two browsers, Internet Explorer and Netscape at the time. And I worried about two screen resolutions, 800 by 600, 1024 by 768. It was a simpler time. And I think at the time, sort of 10, 15 years ago, when CDN architectures first sort of came into play, they were really solving a big problem at the time that was really around getting content from sort of the source, the origin source, the web server, out to the edge of the ISP networks. The problem was really sort of in the core, the middle of the internet at the time. And they were solving this sort of distance challenge. It was sort of getting the stuff from the East Coast to the West Coast. And then once you were in the San Francisco Bay Area or in the New York kind of metro, getting it to the end user was always generally over some sort of wired connection. That wasn't really the problem at the time. And so the way that the content delivery networks sort of solved the distance challenge, and I think they did a great job doing this at the time, was they sort of put a lot of hardware out there in the different ISP networks to cache or create copies of people's websites. Now, if you look today, we've got some new sort of very modern challenges around website and application delivery. The first is the device diversity. So I used to have to deal with a Wintel box with a couple screen resolutions. That was sort of a piece of cake. Today, people are having to deal with not only different operating systems, laptops, desktops. You've got this diversity of browsers now. And of course, everything from phablets to tablets to smartphones. Now people are using their TVs to browse the web. They're doing it on the seat backs in their airplanes. You've got this massive diversity of devices that you have to deal with, and all the different formats and sort of differences in all the different browsers. And then the type of networking that we're using has changed fundamentally as well. So I mentioned sort of 10 years ago, we were all basically on wired connections, and the latency or delay was pretty minimal, and it was a pretty consistent experience. Now we've all moved to some sort of wireless network. And if you look at the latency or the delay on wired, it's pretty small. But if you look at any of the wireless technologies, it doesn't matter if it's public or even private Wi-Fi in your house, or your 3G, or you're on the latest LTE, you can kind of see just the 10x factor almost in latency on these last mile networks. So very quickly we've all moved to the point where even when we're in an office setting, we're on some sort of wireless network, and you get a lot of congestion and people fighting over limited bandwidth. And then the last thing is the applications have changed a lot too. So when I was doing web development sort of 10, 15 years ago, the web browser was really sort of a thin client. The back end was sort of putting together the experience, the HTML, the images. And it was just sending it down to the browser, and everybody was sort of getting the same experience. But now the browsers have become so sophisticated that they're really these application execution environments. And today what we see a lot of people doing is they're just sending the raw elements of the application down to the browser they're putting it all together and rendering these really amazing sort of application-like experiences. They're heavily based on code, things like JavaScript. I used to use JavaScript to make buttons highlight on a web page. When you put the mouse over it, it would sort of flash or something. And today, people are building entire applications driven just in JavaScript inside these browsers. And so if you look at sort of the modern constraints for application delivery, you've still got a distance challenge, but it's greatly reduced. There's been this massive investment in the core of the internet, tons of bandwidth. People have sort of changed the model where there's a lot of peering. And so there's still a congestion or a distance challenge, but it's much lower, about in half. And so you still have to deal with that, but it's much smaller. Now the bigger challenges are around congestion. So getting across those last mile networks on these wireless networks, you're taking these big applications now and trying to shove them down these thinner, more congested pipes. And then you've also got the diversity challenge of the endpoint, right? You've got smartphones, tablets, phablets, TVs, all the different browsers, all the different image formats now that you have to deal with. And so these congestion challenge and diversity challenge are really these new things that the original architectures for content delivery networks really didn't address. And then on top of that, you've got the security challenge, which in the past, the security challenge was mainly sort of secure the back end and the perimeter, use firewalls, gateway devices, web app firewalls. But now you've got the security challenge all the way from the back end through down to the browser. The sophistication of the browser now means that there's a whole new set of attacks that are happening just on the browser on the client side. And so we looked at this, we looked at these new challenges, and we came up with a very different type of architecture. And I think if you look traditionally at CDN architectures, they're very sort of hardware-centric. You get better performance the more sort of hardware that you put out there. If you can just get another cache a little close to the end user, you'll get faster performance. And they're also very network-centric, right? A lot of the benefits you get from CDNs, are sort of caching things closer to the end user or sort of using network acceleration to get the bits down the pipe faster. So what we came up with is a very software-centric solution. In fact, we call it software-defined application delivery. And one of the big things we did is we saw the sophistication of the browsers on the client side and the ability to run really complex applications now. And we actually built a CloudClient Architecture. So we extend the reach of our delivery system all the way down to the end user's system itself. So we can actually run code in the end user's browser. And the trick here is that it's totally transparent. So it's written in JavaScript, the same standards-based JavaScript that Google uses to run their analytics system, we're using to actually write sophisticated software. And it's this thin virtualization layer that actually goes down in the end user's browser and gives us a lot of visibility, so we can see exactly what's going on the client side now. And it gives us a lot of control as well. So now we can change the way we actually deliver applications to the endpoint. And so if you look at our solution, having the CloudClient Architecture means that we can do the traditional things that you'd want to do if you're doing global delivery, things like distributed caching, routing, network acceleration. All that is there in the platform. But the big thing that we've been able to pull off are some solutions to the challenges around congestion and device diversity. So we have invented something called web application streaming that uses the CloudClient Architecture to sort of figure out and analyze what's the minimal set of data that we can send down to the endpoint to get the end user experience to come up in the browser so that they can get to interacting with the website or web application much sooner than with traditional solutions. And so the application streaming technology, we're always trying to analyze things on the back end and use application intelligence plus the client-side control to allow us to basically fragment things like images and code and figure out which pieces do we need to send first versus which do we never have to send or which can we delay, all in the interest of getting that website or web application to show up much sooner. And then the other thing we've been able to do with the client-side control is format adaptation. So I talked about all the different kinds of browsers that are out there now. And so by having this client-side component, we can actually sense the client capabilities. And so we can change images, we can resize images, or we can flip them into newer formats. So people like Google and Microsoft have these newer image formats now, and we can actually take advantage of those where it makes sense. So this CloudClient Architecture gives us this really nice mechanism for changing the whole way that we do delivery by having the client-side visibility and client-side control. And then on top of all of that, we layer on top cloud security solutions. I think one of the things that we've seen over the last sort of 3 years is people primarily are coming to us with performance challenges, but they're very much worried about sort of the realities of security out on the internet today. And so, we deliver fast performance for our customers. We offload their backends, but then we also protect them from the raw elements of the internet as well. And so we have a full suite of cloud security offerings, things like web app firewalls, DDoS protection, and then, given our focus on e-commerce, we've built out a whole PCI Level 1 network that's super locked down and set up for handling credit card transactions. So in terms of the product architecture, we've got a sort of set of foundation services. So we've got a set of APIs that control the system. We've got some great network acceleration technology. So I'd say we've sort of embraced open source technologies for sort of the caching and distributed caching systems and delivery systems. But we've looked for opportunities to improve on things. And I'd say the Global Network Accelerator is one of those. We've got our own proprietary protocol that we use to route data around the internet between our globally distributed locations. And we've got about 30 different serving locations around the world. And then on top of that foundation set of services, we've got our performance suite and our security suite. So on the security side, I mentioned we've got our proxy wall WAF that combines a web application firewall along with the ability for folks to hide their back-end servers from the internet, so that the only way to access someone's website or web application is through our system. So we put a bunch of capacity, a bunch of networking in front of our customers' websites. And then we've got the performance side of the house, so the performance suite. And this is, these features are really all built on top of that CloudClient architecture. And so we have a set of web application streaming capabilities. I'll talk about one more in detail, but we essentially went through and sort of figured out how we can take dynamic HTML and actually stream that, analyze sort of usage patterns across a bunch of users, and figure out which parts of the dynamic HTML are actually not unique to end users. And so you could send that out ahead of time while we request sort of the full personalized experience from the back-end server. We've got a bunch of great image streaming technology where we can actually understand unique images on the page. We can understand if it's a close-up shot of a product, a purse, a handbag, shoes, a faraway shot of a room full of products, or maybe a cityscape. And we can actually apply different approaches in terms of what image format are we going to use, what quality controls are we going to use, depending on the actual content of that image. And then the JavaScript streaming technology, that's the one where I'll go into a little more detail because I think it shows off sort of the CloudClient architecture and how you can do some really sort of interesting and different things. Allows us to analyze what JavaScript is actually used by an application and only send down what you need. On the adaptation side, I talked a little bit about sort of resizing images on the fly, or we've got robust APIs where our customers can resize images or crop images. And then we also have the ability to sense kind of the requesting platform and swap them into newer image formats. And then based on the content analysis, automatically adjust the quality levels. So we've got the performance suite and the security suite all built on top of the foundation services. And what I thought I'd do is go into one of the features, because it sort of highlights some of the things that you can do once you can actually reach down onto the endpoint, onto the end user system. And I think JavaScript really kind of shows this off. So we'll kind of do a quick deep dive there, and then I'll hand it off to Kieran here to talk about Moda Operandi and their experience with us. So JavaScript use on the web has spiked dramatically. I think in the last 3-4 years, it's gone up 3x. So a lot of this is people using third-party JavaScript libraries where they want to make sort of these interactive web experiences. So jQuery is a very popular one, but we're starting to see when people do, say, responsive websites or adaptive websites that they're really leaning quite heavily on these third-party JavaScript libraries. And a lot of these libraries will do 100 things. So jQuery can help you display things on a page in 100 different ways. And the reality is most websites will use a small fraction of these libraries' capabilities and actually a small fraction of the code. We even see that when people write their own JavaScript in-house. They've got a bunch of developers. They're working for year after year. There's a bunch of code that's not actually used. Maybe it's specific to certain versions of a browser. And so we saw this really great opportunity to improve performance because the way browsers work today, they have to download all of the JavaScript, whether they need it or not. So there's all this code being downloaded to everyone's browsers and sort of compiled just before you kind of get to see the web experience. And so we built this cloud client feature called JavaScript streaming. And what it actually allows us to do is we instrument the code. So we've got this deep understanding of JavaScript on the back end. We actually go through and do some instrumentation of the code. And we send that out to real end users. So we are constantly sampling about 4% of the end user population for someone's website. And we're actually sitting there and watching how in their browser we can actually watch what JavaScript are they actually using when they're going through someone's website or web application. We collect this information anonymously and we beacon it back to our cloud service. And then we use a bunch of machine learning technology that actually will correlate across all the end users. It'll look at the JavaScript, the different browsers, the different devices, and it'll actually allow us to get a clear picture of what code is actually being used and what code is never actually touched on or used. And so then on the back end, what the cloud side of the service can do, it can actually now pick apart these big JavaScript libraries and figure out, hey, here's actually the code that's used, and here's a bunch of code that's never actually used by this application, or maybe it's used by a specific browser. And so now we don't have to send that information to every single user and sort of penalize them with downloading that and having their CPU cycles on their devices hammered to load that up. So then once we learn the usage patterns, we'll only send the JavaScript that's actually required down to the end user's browser. And then we've got the nanovisor down there, the client-side component. This is the cloud side of our service. So it gives us the visibility, so it allows us to collect that information about what code is used by these different applications. But it also provides us the ability to demand load things. So let's say the usage patterns for the application changes all of a sudden, and suddenly you need some other JavaScript that we didn't learn that we needed. We'll just go demand load that from the network. We'll bring it down, and they can continue to use the application. And then we just add that to learning. So having this client-side control gives us the ability to pull off these really sophisticated features, but do it safely and have this ability to do sort of all the ongoing learning of how end users are actually interacting with websites and applications and the content, and ultimately allows us to make much better delivery decisions that speed up and enhance people's end user experience. And so with that, I wanted to invite Kieran from Moda Operandi. He's the Chief Technology Officer to talk a little bit about their web experience and some of their experience with us.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, hopefully this is working. Not too much noise. Awesome. Well, good. If I can unravel myself here. Here we go. Good morning, everyone. Has anyone actually heard of Moda Operandi by any chance? One at the back there. You don't count, Dan. Not surprised, you're not quite our target demographic, I have to admit. So Moda is in the high-end luxury e-com space. So we work with really high-end designer luxury brands and allow consumers really to pre-order next season's fashion right off the runway from those brands. So it's a pretty unique business model. We're still the only e-com vendor doing this, retailer doing this in the world to the extent that we know of. So a very interesting model where we're pushing the boundaries of kind of what we can do. And as you can imagine, when you're dealing in high-end luxury, the product sells itself to a large degree. It's all about the visuals. It's all about the product. And what we went in, I came into the company, part of an acquisition back probably a year and a half ago now. And we recognized when I came in, we looked at the current site and said, well, it's really not the Moda brand in our space in the luxury segment is really amazing offline and not really very well portrayed online. So literally 4 weeks ago, we spent a year building out a whole new e-com stack and built a brand new website on top of that stack, migrated a 4.5-year-old, many tens of $1 million business running at the time. And at the stroke of midnight, one Sunday morning, Saturday night, we turned on the new site, which included going live with Instart Logic and their application delivery network. And I can kind of talk you through a bit why do we use them and what the benefits that we see with the new site. And I'll show you a bit about the new site as well. So anyone here in the e-com space, from the e-com world? So anyone who's in the e-com world, I think it's pretty good knowledge that performance is key. One, we have this nuance because content and imagery is absolutely key as well. But how fast that page loads, and more importantly, it's not how fast does everything on the page load, but what's that first kind of user interaction? And that's what we were really looking to optimize for was, okay, we've got a very visually intensive site, but how can we make sure that across all the devices we have, the page loads very, very quickly so the user feels like it's snappy. You know, our goal was to have this kind of 1-2 second response time where it just feels you press a button, the site loads. This is pretty crucial to the e-com world, just simply because performance, the worse performance of the site, the more you lose in revenue. It's like if you were a retail store and you made people queue up to get into the store. Well, if you're Apple, it works. But if you're not Apple, if you're going to stop someone getting into the store, you lose business. It's the same for e-com. So performance is absolutely critical for us, which is why we needed a strong partner that we could work with. So what did we do? So we launched this new site about, literally 4 weeks ago. It was a brand new technology platform built in-house, brand new website designed and built from scratch, from the ground up. And we just kind of flipped the switch on one and turned the switch and brought up the new site. Our real goal here was really to pioneer in the luxury space how you can take content and commerce and bring them together. So we're already very image intensive with obviously product imagery, but we also wanted to bring in a lot of editorial imagery into our product grids, into every page, and blend those two together. And to give you an idea, some of our pages, and we're still working on this in terms of optimization, but part of it we've offloaded the effort of optimization over to Instart Logic. Some of our pages are 10 to 15 meg or more when you look at the page and all of the imagery that gets loaded. That's great from a visual experience, but obviously as an e-commerce site, that sucks because I'm having to load so much content. So that's where having someone that I can offload that problem to became critical to us. We also moved to very long form pages. I'll show you an example. My personal belief is that e-com is moving to devices. It's moving to iPads, phones. It's moving to laptops with touch pads, two-finger scrolling. The days of everything has to be above the fold with a mouse that clicks something is long gone, in my belief. I don't think e-com's quite there yet, but we're certainly pioneering the way where everything we've done is about scrolling. It's about making sure that you can just keep scrolling. So it's beyond infinite scroll. It's just making sure every page experience, there's more that the user can engage with as they keep scrolling the page. So that's important, but at the same time, when the user scrolls, you don't want the lag time of images. Oh, there's the image. Oh, there's the image. So we wanted to, again, work with someone that could really make sure that the pages, as you scroll through 3, 4, 5 page loads, if you like, the site is super responsive. The imagery is there, ready for the user. We have a fully responsive site design. Very hard to do, but we decided to go for this approach where it's the same site that loads on every device. Doesn't matter what orientation I'm using, my phone on my iPad or my desktop, doesn't matter how big the browser is, the site will dynamically optimize for that experience. That means the images have to resize, the whole page has to dynamically scale. We honestly didn't have enough time or bandwidth to worry about all the performance optimization needed to make the site work well out of the box across all of those devices. When you think about optimizing, as Peter was going through, the page load, the JavaScript loading, the image load, the image streaming, optimizing the images for those devices, we just basically said, hey, that's Instart's problem. Let's leave them to take care of that so we can just write the code once and they can worry about optimizing it for the iPhone or this particular network speed or that iPad or for that computer and making sure that the right size images get loaded. So we really were able to offload an awful lot of what we would normally as application developers have to take care of within our own code base, say, hey, we don't have to worry about that. We're just going to front our entire website with Instart. So all of our IP, it's all HTTPS. One of our conscious decisions was to essentially move the site all to HTTPS. Good for Google, good for the customers. Because it's responsive, also good for Google now. But by using Instart, we always say, hey, all the things we'd have to do to make sure one site loads optimally across all of these devices and still runs fast, I'll leave these guys to do. Now we can just build one site, worry about building a clean, responsive site, and not worry about the details of network and resource optimization. We really have, and I'll show you, kind of immersive, big, beautiful imagery. Our editorial team was a big driver around this desire to create this e-commerce experience where content and commerce really come together to reinforce and complement each other. And a big part of that in the luxury space is about having big editorial imagery. I mean, if you think of flipping through the covers of Vogue. It's nothing but beautiful pictures. So that's where we wanted to move our site experience. Give you an example. This is, you don't have to read this, eyesight test. This is our old site, and this is just the entire page, not what would actually be one screen. This is 3 or 4 screen loads. Just I put it on a page, say, hey, this was the standard of our site. Nothing overly special. It worked. It got us through the first 4 years of growing our business, which was phenomenal. But it was just basically a grid of product shots of runway images that we'd put on a page, and the customers could come and now shop the runway directly through Moda. So that was before. What we wanted to move to is something that was much more immersive. So one, we're bringing in live streaming video. This is something where we use a different provider. But all of our grids now, the images are multivariant in sizes. Some of them use animated GIFs. Some of them use embedded video. All of the imagery, as you can see, you just keep scrolling. You'll get a really immersive, interactive experience. And the key is, as I scroll the page, you don't want images coming in broken up and feeling like the page is jittery. So that's, again, why we used someone like Instart Logic. Say, hey, I'm going to design this page with all this amazing embedded editorial content. I'll leave you guys to make sure that the user's going to get a really responsive first page load, and then as they scroll, just a seamless experience. And they've really delivered on that for us. Again, we've been live with them on this new site for about 4 weeks. I actually used them in my previous incarnation. It's probably one of the, first 15 customers in my previous company that Moda acquired. So I've had a long working experience with Instart. I've been very, very pleased with what they've delivered for us, but also the way they've worked with us. Oh, let me see if I can, there we go. But also the way they've worked with us to ensure that we deliver a key experience to our customers, that we can deliver that experience without having to worry about a lot of the detail. So they've been great from a support standpoint as well. It's not often you can stand up and say, hey, these vendors were up at 12 midnight. Their support guy was on the phone, checking out the site as it went live, sending us, oh, did you know this? And could you check out this? And by the way, I found this over here, way above and beyond what you would expect of a normal vendor who's just going to sit there normally and say, hey, how did the launch go? These guys were embedded with us really as we launched this new site experience. So we're very proud of what we've delivered, what we've built. We're very happy with what Instart have done for us. And I really encourage people to think beyond just the traditional CDN. The world's changing. You've got to have the logic, the intelligence in the browser to optimize this next generation of web applications that we all want to build. So that's my story, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'll hang around for a little bit offline, but that's it. Thank you.